Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Curious Geographer Live. Super exciting to be here. So just to give a quick overview, every week, every Thursday, we are going to be speaking to academics, journalists, and professionals, and they will be talking about their areas of interest. It's going to be great for everybody, but also though for those at school. So write hi in the comments as well. And if you've got any questions, then put them down and I will get them answered as well. So in this interview today, we are going to be going live with Dr. Madeleine Morris. Madeleine is a research associate at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London. She also works within the Energy Revolution Research Consortium, particularly in policy and regulation. So we're going to be talking about local energy systems, why they're sustainable, and that move when what the UK is doing to kind of move to renewable energy. So it's linked to so many topics in A-level geography, particularly the carbon cycle, but also resource security as well. And we will be talking about those really key terms which we often learn about in geography, such as systems, resilience, sustainability, but also looking at it on scale as well. If you are in GCSE or don't know much about that already, then we will talk and we will break down those concepts for you, but it also links to energy in the UK for GCSE students. So it should be really interesting. We're really looking forward to starting. And I'm just going to get Madeleine. Madeleine, if you could just introduce yourself to us and just let us know a bit about what your role is and what are you currently working on at the moment.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Madeleine, and as you just heard, I am a researcher based at Imperial College London. So my job as a researcher is to discover new insight and new evidence, and then communicate that with business, industries, and policymakers to help shape good decisions that will benefit everybody in the future. And my role in the Energy Revolution Research Consortium, or Energy Rev as we shorten it to, well, that's been set up to look at all the aspects of the big changes that are going on to the energy system that we can see now. So things like the fact that we're changing from a system based on fossil fuels to one based on renewables. And so we're looking at all the different aspects of that, including things like the environmental impacts, effects on kind of the business models and the different businesses that might come out in this, user behaviour, so how we actually use our energy, when we use it, all the way to kind of scaling up from pilot projects to whole regions. And so my job specifically is to look at the policies and regulations related to energy in the UK with a focus on these things called smart local energy systems, which we will explain at some point, or I'll talk about. But the reason that policy and regulation are really important is because energy is an essential service. We couldn't survive without it. And so the government has to have set plans and procedures in place, policies, and then also really strict rules about who can, for example, generate electricity, who can sell it to us. That's the regulations. And that means that we're protected from blackouts, and also means that we don't get ripped off by energy companies. So I'm looking to see whether the policies and regulations that are in place today will also be appropriate for the future, or whether we need to make big changes to that.
Brilliant. And so we often learn about lots of different types when we study energy, such as your renewable, your non-renewable, and your fossil fuels. Could you just give us a bit of an insight? Like, your role is moving towards a more kind of renewable future. What are the different types of energy out there, and what might be part of the energy future for the UK?
Well, in the UK, it's I can actually tell you right now, sort of live stats on where the energy is coming from, the electricity is coming from in the UK. So at the moment, we've got about 34% of the electricity that's being generated in the UK is coming from renewable sources. 13% of that is coming from solar energy, which to me is very surprising because it is very wet outside my window. But obviously elsewhere in the UK, there will be sun. So that's quite a large amount, 13%. About 20% is coming from wind energy. So they're the biggest sources. And then there's a little bit of hydroelectric power that's coming as well. So they're the main players, and I think solar and wind are considered to have the most potential in the UK and in a lot of areas of the world as well in terms of renewable energy.
And could you just give us a quick definition? What exactly is renewable energy when we're talking about it?
So renewable energy has to come from a resource which won't be depleted, it won't run out in kind of our lifetime. So solar and wind, we don't run out of them. They might not always be there in a particular place at the same time, but it's not like we're going to run out of it. Things like biomass, I think, could be considered renewable because you can grow more plants to use for biofuels, but if we're using it at a rate that's quicker than the rate that we can grow it at, then that's not a sustainable resource. So there's a little bit of debate about how much of a future biomass has and where it could be used. So it might be used, but it might not be everywhere. And that's kind of the thing about renewable at the moment in the world. Everybody's kind of using fossil fuels to a large extent, but in the future there'll be maybe different kinds of renewable energies, and the mix will look different in different areas of the world, and maybe even in different areas of the country. So some areas of the UK get more sun than others, some get more wind than others.
We'll get on to that in a second about how different places will benefit from different types of renewable energy. So if they have a lot more sun, or for example, the UK gets a lot of wind energy because we're an island. But just to also just briefly kind of go back to those basics before we then kind of go a bit deeper, why is it so important for the UK to move away from our fossil fuels and also our non-renewable energy at the moment?
So fossil fuels are a pollutant. One of the worst ones that we get out of it is carbon dioxide, and that is causing the global average temperature to increase. And this can have really devastating impacts for wildlife, for us, for oceans. And so we really need to stop using fossil fuels. The UK, a lot of countries are now committing, so they have put policies in place, they've put it into law that says they will reduce their carbon emissions by a certain percentage. The UK has committed to reaching what we call net zero by 2050. So that's about 30 years that we've got to completely reduce our emissions to net zero, which means that we can still be doing some activities that produce carbon emissions as long as there's sort of an equal amount of activities that can take that carbon out of the air. It could be things like trees, plants. They suck energy away out of the air and store it, they use it for their fuel. So as long as we have that kind of balance, there might be some areas where we can actually eliminate carbon emissions, but we need to get it down to as low as we can.
Okay, so net zero isn't going exactly everything renewable energy. It just means that if we do have some carbon emissions, that they are then also balanced out by what we're doing to make sure that overall we have zero carbon emissions.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some areas where it's really easy to decarbonize. So electricity is one that's considered quite easy because we have other forms. We have, as we said, solar, wind, and we can produce it, and it doesn't affect our day-to-day lives. We don't have to change anything because it's the same electricity that reaches our appliances. There's some activities, some kind of industrial processes that maybe need really high temperatures that require burning certain fuels. Other things like aviation, so we don't really have an alternative fuel for flights that is zero emission. So there might be some areas that we can't completely decarbonize, but as long as we're taking as much out as we're putting in, we reckon that's quite a good place to get to.
And one thing that you're really kind of focusing on at the moment is the idea of local energy systems. Please, can you let us know what is a local energy system?
That's quite a tricky question. And actually, as a research consortium, we have people doing whole reviews on exactly what that means. It's maybe easier if I kind of talk through how the system works at the moment. So I don't know if we can get that diagram up that might help people follow what I mean. But
yep, it's up.
oh, okay. So on the left is a representation of what our energy system looks like at the moment. So somewhere far away, out of sight, you usually can't see it from where you live. There's huge power plants that are burning fossil fuel and emitting carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the air. Then really big pipes and wires transmit that electricity or gas for heating and cooking quite long distances up and down the country. That's what's known as the national grids. And then smaller pipes take that energy from the national grid to our houses, to our homes and businesses, and then we get to use it. This is what's known as a centralized system. So it's kind of very top down. So everything's being generated by the big power stations, and then it goes downwards towards us as consumers, as customers. We don't really have any role to play in it. I imagine that most people don't actually think about where their energy comes from. Certainly not as many times as you use it a day. All you really do is pay bills, and that's it, and hope that you don't get cut off. In the future, though, we're going to have to move to a very different system. It's going to have to be cleaner, obviously, and it's going to have to be more efficient. And so we can see already that renewables are playing a part in that. So let me just try and make sure I can also see this. So yeah, the diagram on the right is kind of what tomorrow's or the future system might look like. So we've got lots of renewable energies. Now they tend to be much smaller in scale than big power plants, and you can have them much closer to your homes, maybe even sometimes on your home. So some people will have solar panels on their roofs that they can generate. That means we have a more what's called decentralized. We have kind of lots of little pockets of generation all across the country, and they can go sort of the other direction from your house, maybe through these small wires to the rest of the country. In this way, we as customers can be a lot more active, so we can actually be generators of electricity, and so we might have a lot more control over how that works. So because it's more decentralized, we can have it in a local way. So when I'm saying local, I mostly mean there's some sort of geographic boundary around it that's smaller than the national system that we've got. But this exactly what scale that will be, we're not really sure. These kind of things are still emerging, which is quite exciting. And it might actually be that in some areas you have really small systems, in other areas they're a bit bigger. But there's a lot to still discover. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It might be different for different people in different areas of the world. It might be different for people in different areas of the country. One of the things that is kind of exciting is say I had solar panels on my roof and you didn't, and I was generating, it was a really sunny day, I wasn't using all of the, and you didn't have any on your roof. So maybe I could sell my electricity to you for a cheaper price than perhaps you could get it from the grids. Then I would make a little bit of money, you would save a little bit of money, and also the electricity wouldn't be traveling such long distances, which makes it could make it a more efficient system, because sort of the longer it has to travel, the more chances there are for efficiency losses and stuff like that. Obviously, one sort of person's solar panels on their roof isn't isn't going to match a whole power plant. But there are also other ideas of creating what are called virtual power plants. So this is where you've got lots of these decentralized or distributed, we call them assets. So anything that can generate electricity, whether it's a little power plant or a couple of wind turbines. And so using some sort of clever software and artificial intelligence, you could kind of connect all of these together and make them work sort of as one power plant. So there'd be someone who was in control of that, or a piece of software, and they would be able to club them all together and either sell the electricity or turn up or down. So there's, again, balance between supply and demand. And in this way, we could ask people to use a little bit less electricity if it doesn't make any difference to their lifestyle. And that would put less pressure, and we wouldn't have to kind of turn on gas turbines or anything to top up the difference.
I'm just going to repeat my question. I know you just answered it very well, but I was actually on mute when I asked you that, so I had a lot of comments.
Oh, sorry.
No, your answer came through. My speaking was on mute. So I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier, and then hopefully that will then make sense to what everybody's just heard from you. So what I originally said was, after we had looked at your diagram with the left and the right, was that on the left-hand side was the old system. So the old system was the top-down approach, and we often talk about top-down and bottom-up approaches in geography. So that top-down approach is that your energy is made by the governments, and that, for example, fossil fuels, and there's electrical plants, and that's how then it gets fed down to the local people. Whereas in this new approach, the future, is what you were saying, was that it's actually more of a partnership approach. So you might get some energy from renewable energies, but then also people might have it on their homes as well. And that makes it that you're kind of making it not a complete top-down approach, but also together as a partnership approach. And then the question I asked you, just to make it clear with your fantastic answer, was, I said, what exactly would these small systems look like, which is what you're explaining. And then could you give me an example? Is there anywhere that has actually had a kind of small local system set up?
The one I can think of is in the Orkney Island. So that's way off the north coast of Scotland. So they're in kind of a unique situation because they're physically obviously separate from the mainland. I think they do have wires kind of under the sea that do connect them, but they're quite limited. And it's very windy up there, and so they've been using wind power for quite a long time now, and they're in this weird situation where they're actually generating too much wind power. It means that they can't actually use all on the island themselves, and they can't export it to the rest of the grids because the wires are too small. There's kind of a bottleneck, and to make those wires bigger to upgrade that is really expensive. So what they're instead trying to do is build kind of I think they call it a smart energy island. And so they're putting big batteries in people's homes, like really quite big ones that could store electricity when it's being generated but not being used. They're also they're implementing lots of electric vehicles. So these are cars and buses that run on electricity rather than on petrol or diesel. They're essentially also like big batteries. They can kind of store energy as well. They also have what they call smart heating systems. So most people will use a heating system that's based on gas. So you might have a gas boiler in your house, and that burns and we generate heat. So what they're trying to do is be kind of self-sufficient, using all the renewable energy that they can already generate and actually just use it in a smarter way. And in that way, they can reduce or completely eliminate their reliance on fossil fuels for when they don't have any wind. And hopefully that improves people's experiences on the island.
So a few things you said there which is quite interesting was, one, the Orkney Island. So that is actually North Scotland, and that it's really good for wind energy over there. I think wind energy as a whole in the UK is at the moment one of our biggest renewable suppliers.
Yeah.
In geography, we often talk about sustainability. So we often evaluate things whether they are sustainable, thinking about the social, the economic, and the environmental positives or benefits, looking at how they impact people. For these local energy systems, would you mind talking about those? Like, what are, because for something to be sustainable, it's not just reducing fossil fuels, and you've talked about that a bit with people's homes and maybe having electric vehicles as well. But could you just summarize, why are these sustainable, these local energy systems, socially, economically, and environmentally?
Yeah, I'll start maybe with the environmental ones, because we've talked a little bit about them. So if we make it a smarter system, then we can implement renewables, add more renewables more quickly, because they're intermittent. There are some worries that if we just suddenly switched to all renewable, the system wouldn't really be able to cope with sort of the peaks and troughs of it. So as well as going local, there are hopes that it's going to be a smarter system using things like artificial intelligence and even just understanding better what the requirements are. It means that you can also, if it's local, you can kind of use the local resources, so you can understand the area much better. So Orkney, yes, has lots of wind, so it makes sense to have wind power there. Cornwall, at the other end of the country, in the southwest of England, gets loads of sun. So you can kind of tailor your energy system to the needs of the local people and also resources. It also means that if you go local, there's a potential to have a kind of a better understanding of things like wildlife and ecosystems around it, and do a better assessment of how a new energy system might impact that. And there might be benefits for that as well, versus, for example, building a massive power station. The economic benefits, well, hopefully it will save us money. So if it's more efficient, if we don't have to build loads more wires, if we can just find the pockets of the country where there's lots of demand and there's lots of potential supply, then we won't have to build loads more, because it's very expensive to do that. And essentially, we end up paying for that through our bills. And so the less we have to build, the more efficient the system, the more economically sensible it is to do that. It can also create local jobs as well, actually, which is something that could be really important. I think there's becoming more of a push towards kind of community-based solutions, and helping communities and areas become a little bit more self-sufficient. And so if you're creating local jobs, creating a local energy system, you could make your communities more resilient, actually. And then the social benefits, I think, are quite interesting. So linked obviously with the local jobs, if you generate better and sort of more prosperous communities, then you have people with better qualities of life. You increase your self-sufficiency and resilience, reduce the reliance on national infrastructure, and people can feel like they're more in control, which can be quite important actually for a lot of people. You know, it can be quite empowering for me to say, well, I can actually sell energy to my neighbours who might need it. At the moment, we can't do that. There's also some more indirect, what we call co-benefits of moving to smart or local energy systems. If we reduce the pollution, like if we take away fossil fuels from our power stations and also from our cars and vehicles, people will be healthier. So more renewables means less air pollution, which means fewer respiratory issues for people. It also means that, well, hopefully if it becomes cheaper to heat your house, then there won't be so many people choosing between being able to heat their house and paying for food shopping or something like that. There's a concept called fuel poverty, which unfortunately we do have in the UK, which is where essentially it means you can't afford to use the fuel you need to use to be comfortable and to survive well. And so the fact that we're going through this transition kind of gives us an opportunity to balance things again. to make it a fairer, more just system. So I think whenever you're going through a transition, there is that opportunity, but hopefully we could close the gap here. If we're completely changing our energy system, then maybe we can change the way that we charge people. Maybe we can help people out who can't afford to buy a solar panel because they might get left behind. So if I have lots of money, I can afford to get an electric car and solar panels, and then I make lots of money. But then that kind of widens the gap. So we need to also be careful to make sure that doesn't happen, because it would just create more problems. And the whole point of going through a transition is to solve problems, really. So hopefully it will make a much fairer system, which I think could be really interesting. And I think going local again gives the chance to bring local people into the conversation, local authorities who understand their people much better than, say, the national government. They just can't possibly understand exactly what people are like. And you know, the UK is a very diverse place. People in the north of Scotland might be very different from people in London or Wales, Northern Ireland, Cornwall, in the north. People change all over the place. So this way we can really tailor it and hopefully everybody benefits.
So I just said, if anybody does have any questions for Dr. Madeleine Morris, if you could just write them in the comments below. There's already one up there from Hannah, and we are going to be talking to Madeleine about how she got to her career as well. So finally, I'm just going to give one more question from me, and then if anybody else does have any questions, if you could just write them there. Just really quickly back on that sustainability, I've actually seen a few clips in how Bangladesh, for example, they are using local energy systems with solar energy. So they are putting solar panels on their home, and again, that can be used for like the community and that community resilience, so they can then be also selling that energy, and it means that many of them might be able to afford it. So when we're talking about these local energy systems, it's potentially a global solution to energy, not just what's happening in the UK. So my question for you is, do you think the UK is going to be able to move to this local system? And if so, any idea on timescales? That's probably quite a difficult question. But and then I'll quickly ask you about your career afterwards. What do you think the UK's future is with these local energy systems?
I think it's honestly too early to tell, because we're still kind of at the beginning of this transition. We're definitely going to get loads more renewables, but whether we move to a system where kind of this structure of who generates it, who owns it, who sells it, as it might stay the same, which might be the best thing. So essentially the reason that the research consortium that I'm a member of, Energy Rev, was set up, it was actually set up by the government, as was the project that I mentioned in Orkney. So that's known as a demonstrator project, which is kind of like a really big pilot project. So it's not just a test. They're running this kind of in real time with real people. And so the reason that they've set it up is so that we can gather all the evidence that we can. So there's this project in Orkney, there's another two in Oxfordshire, and there's one in West Sussex. And so we're hopefully going to be working really closely with them. They're going to be trying to do this, and they're going to be capturing lots of evidence about where there are benefits, and whether there are benefits, there might be things that actually go really badly. It might not be suitable. So basically my job as a researcher, and our job as academics, is to gather up all this evidence and make recommendations. So I will have a lot of meetings with policymakers to bring them this evidence that hopefully allows them to make really good, informed decisions that do put us on a path to a net zero future. So watch this space.
Great. So I'm just going to have a quick look at our comments. So we've got loads of you online. So hello to all our geography students. So hello, Ilyas, Rachel, Zed, Desire, Saffron, who are all online, Ellie and Hannah. We have got a question from Hannah, which is actually what I was going to ask about next. And then we actually got another question coming through as well. So kind of on careers, Hannah's asked, and actually it's a bit of a sneaky kind of first geographers interview, because Actually, Madeleine, you did chemistry for your degree and then went into geography, so we can talk about that in a second. But from Hannah, how did you know you wanted a job centred around energy, and what path did you take to end up in your current position?
I think I have always been very interested in a sustainable future, and I was always quite environmentally minded. I was, as a kid, I was the annoying person who would tell off my family members for leaving lights on and stuff like that. I just really enjoyed chemistry when I was in school, and so I decided to do an undergraduate degree in that. And I think that's when I came across the concepts of solar energy, and it just really interested me. The science was really interesting, but I think what was for me more important was the potential impact of that. We could see that fossil fuels were a really bad thing. We needed to get away from it, and so for me, solar energy was a really exciting thing to look at. I then did a PhD. So my undergraduate was in Edinburgh, and then I did a PhD in London and at Imperial College in the chemistry department, again looking at new materials for solar energy. So it was very fundamental science. I spent most of my days in a windowless lab firing lasers at very expensive materials to figure out what would happen when you put sunlight on them. And so I kind of thought, well, this isn't really as impactful as I thought it would be. I also realized that a lot of technology like wind and solar were already really advanced, and that actually what the issue was policy. It was the fact that a lot of people were a little bit worried about this. I think people are always a little bit averse to change, and especially when you've got this massive industry that they would essentially lose out. So I really wanted to kind of get in there and get into the policy related stuff. And that's when I found this job at Imperial College. And this is quite nice because it kind of lets me, I still have the research side of things, but then I'm also talking to policymakers and also industry, and hopefully we'll be able to see the changes quite quickly.
And I think particularly when we're talking to our year 12s and 13s and they're making decisions, and even actually year 11s, that sometimes at school you kind of get that feeling that if you go down one route then you can't do anything else, and actually like it is quite interchangeable. So actually a lot of your job is working with people as well and seeing that how geography impacts the energy as well. So for all those out there making decisions, like your decisions do not define exactly what you do, and you can always like sway into other career paths that interest you. I've just got one final question just from Ellie. In A-level geography, they actually learn quite a bit about carbon capture. I'm not sure how much you know about or you focus in that. But Ellie has said, what do you think about carbon capture and storage? Do you think it is a sustainable solution to climate change?
Oh, yeah, that's quite a big question. At the moment, carbon capture and storage is still in the research and development stage. So that means that we don't yet have any scalable solutions that we can actually use. There's a lot of research going into it, because obviously it would be fantastic if we could all of a sudden just start sucking loads of carbon dioxide out of the air. It would solve a lot of problems. And if you look at a lot of the predictions that are made by, so the Committee on Climate Change, the CCC, is the government's like official advisory board. So they do a lot of really brilliant work looking at kind of future scenarios, and carbon capture and storage is always featured as something that will be necessary. So I think it's really important that there's still lots and lots of research being done in it. It's at the moment very expensive, so it shouldn't be treated as the holy grail. I think we need to be doing everything else that we can just in case this doesn't work. I think maybe it would be dangerous to assume that this was going to save us all. And I think I'm also just quite excited about the other social benefits that could come from an energy transition. We don't have a very equal situation at the moment. The fact that we have people in energy poverty is really unacceptable, I think. So I think that there are changes that need to happen anyway. And so I think doing something that's quite a holistic change, so tackling environmental problems, economic problems, and also social problems at the same time, I think sounds like a pretty smart way to go.
One more question has actually just come on, if you don't mind answering this, from Ilyas, and then,
yeah, sure.
And then we'll thank you, and then we'll end this fantastic chat that you've been having. So there's two questions that actually been linked to our current climate with coronavirus. Thinking about potentially the positive impact on the climate, and then Ilyas has just been saying, thinking about lockdown at the moment. As geography students, I mean, how can we save our planet from home? Is there anything they should be doing or should not be doing? Because actually our home energy, it's been said that because more people are at home, we are using more energy, but then we're not using energy in other spheres of where we might usually have used it. So any advice out there for people who are looking to support the environment during this period of time?
So on the first one there, on the sort of potential benefits, I don't think there'll be anybody in the climate change community who would say that this is a good thing, even for the climate. There has been a noticeable drop in pollution and in carbon emissions, but although it feels like we've been in lockdown for a long time, in the grand scheme of things, it's still such a short amount of time, and this kind of thing has happened before. So in 2008, there was a big, what do we call it back then, the credit crunch. There was an economic crash, and every time there's an economic downturn, you see the carbon emissions dip. But then what happens as the economy recovers is that the emissions come back up again to where they were before, and they just keep increasing. So this is not a good thing for the environment. This isn't where we need to go. I think there are things that obviously we can learn from it. We can learn that with good policies and with understanding of what the dangers are, we can implement measures that work. That's something that we've shown. So yes, lockdown was extreme, but it is working. It was necessary, and people understood that, and so they've been more likely to accept it. So I think there's a lot of lessons in terms of communication and what communication people need to feel that these changes are beneficial. Our home energy usage, yes, has gone up, but as you say, because our industries have shut down, the energy demand of the UK and actually across the world, in many countries that have been hit by this, the total energy demand has dropped. But again, this isn't a sustainable change, because if the economy picks up and goes back to where it was, then we're kind of back to business as usual. So there's a lot of talk about covering the economy, but in a green way. And so rather than giving lots of money to industries that were big before but that were very polluting, perhaps we actually redivert our efforts and we think about all the different innovators and entrepreneurs that could come out of this, who have really great solutions to make our life more sustainable. And then at home, so I might actually direct you to the Grantham Institute, where I'm based, in just a few months ago released a little leaflet that's called 9 Things You Can Do About Climate Change. And this is specifically aimed at individuals. So some of them might not be as relevant now, because it's things like don't travel in your car and stuff like that. But it's still really interesting, and there are lots of things that you can do there, or that you can think about doing and carrying on in your life as you go along. So it's 9 things you can do about climate change on the Grantham Institute website. Hopefully that will give you some inspiration.
That sounds great, and I'm sure we can put that in the link below when this goes out as well. Can I say a massive thank you, and thanks for putting on sort of the last question as well. But I think we've learned so much and covered such a wide range of parts related to the UK's energy, what the potential futures are, and the benefits for that, looking at local energy systems. So can I just say a massive thank you to you, Madeleine. It has really been really fantastic. And just to end for everybody, so thank you again for coming in and watching. Thank you for all your comments. It's been great to have you guys all online and to ask some questions as well. So thank you for those who have been answering questions. And thank you again to Madeleine for taking her time as well out of her working day to also speak to us about something so relevant to geography. Next week, we are going to be talking about heat wave risk in the UK. So what is happening with the UK's heat wave? It's been really, really hot recently. And so that is going to be on Thursday with Dr. Alan Kennedy-Asser, who is from Bristol University. So tune in, I think it's going to be at 3 p.m. again, so we'll let you know. And that's everything from me. If you found this video useful, just comment and like and subscribe as well. And then we've got a lot of thank yous coming your way as well, Madeleine. So hope everybody has a nice rest of their day. Bye.